Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review for June 8, 2025. Our guest today is Hrant Mikaelian, a multidisciplinary researcher in the social sciences based in Yerevan.
So before we go to Hrant, we interrupt your regular programming with breaking news. Trump and Musk, it's over, like unfollowed and blocked over. But unlike unstable billionaires with a huge ego, we're here for you every week. Help us stick around by going to podcasts.groong.org/donate, pick Patreon or buy me a coffee and either make a one-time donation or become a sustaining member. And if you can't chip in, remember you can comment, like, and share. That is the healthy kind of codependency that we promote at Groong. Thank you very much, and on to the show.
Yeah. Welcome back, Hrant. Glad to have you on the Groong podcast again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here.
We have to start with this topic, unfortunately, but Pashinyan and his wife continued their vile, shameful, and foul-mouthed tirades against the Armenian Church last week. And his most recent call was just, we're recording on Monday, so it was noon on Monday, and he continued to press for the Catholicos to resign. So I just have one question: why? Why is he doing this now?
A good question. First of all, regarding the speech he has, you can put an advisory for parents not to listen to him. And frankly speaking, even ISIS would be much more ashamed to speak this way about Armenian Church. Now, regarding the political side here, obviously this is a political campaign. First, 2 weeks ago, an Azerbaijani spiritual leader started attacking Armenian Church because Armenian Church started, spreading more and more materials against Azerbaijani actions in Artsakh and against Pashinyan's policy towards Artsakh, and not only Artsakh, towards his capitulation policy towards Armenian question. So, in fact, Armenian Church has remained the last standing institution. We can remember how previously institutions were captured. First of all, it was government, then it was parliament, then it was court system, and then separately the constitutional court, then the ombudsman office, the president office. By the way, they have captured also Yerevan
Organization.
Yeah, and now they are trying to capture the Armenian Apostolic Church because all other institutions have been captured. The real goal was here to concede Artsakh and to let no one question it. So now the church is questioning it. So his speeches about, factual side of his speeches, personal behavior of priests have no connection to reality and to this, to this matter, because this is purely political debate, and the campaign is aimed at capturing Armenian Apostolic Church, putting their own people, and making this church, as dysfunctional as the presidential apparatus is right now. Because many are questioning where is the president right now. But in fact, we don't have president. Obvious thing, Khachaturian, who was previously Minister of Economy and of High Technology of Armenia in the Pashinyan government, has been subordinate. Not only he is member of team, but he has been vertically subordinated to Pashinyan. And just this fact already shows that he can't be president, he can't be independent. So the same thing Pashinyan wants to do with the church.
Yeah, in fact, in his latest shit post, he said that I have freed Armenia and given it back to the people. Now I'm going to free the Armenian Church and give it back to the people. Meanwhile, in a rare public gesture, speaking of constitutionality, Levon Ter-Petrosyan lent his full support to the Catholicos, holding a private meeting with Garegin II and issuing a public statement calling Pashinyan's antics anti-constitutional, to which Pashinyan's response didn't take too long to arrive. In a separate Facebook post, Pashinyan said, Levon Ter-Petrosyan is the founder of the practice of election fraud in the Republic of Armenia, and he must, of course, stand by populist fraudsters like him. it's interesting that Pashinyan was the #1 ally of Levon Ter-Petrosyan in 2008 during the March revolt, and even before that. It's interesting the switch of rhetoric
And
from
after as well.
Pashinyan. Yeah.
He had a lot of time to ask this question to Ter-Petrosyan.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, some say that both Pashinyan and Levon Ter-Petrosyan can be right, that this is both anti-constitutional and Levon Ter-Petrosyan, besides, I don't want to go into Levon Ter-Petrosyan, but I wanted to ask you, where do you see this ending up? Do you think that this is like a tactical move just to throw shit at the wall and see what sticks? Or is this a strategic move by Pashinyan, and will he go to the end with this tirade against the church?
I think this is a strategic move. It started a bit unexpectedly for Pashinyan, because when he faced criticism on the side of church, he started this campaign, let's say, not well prepared. But then we have seen some actions which have been prepared already, because for him it would be much more beneficial if some minor representatives of his team started attacking church, and then him to jump in. But he was very in a big hurry, most likely because of Azerbaijan. Very little question here, because now they are criticizing Armenian Church together with Azerbaijanis, and they are like playing table tennis on this topic. So I think the goal is to capture Armenian Church, and Pashinyan said that just today, that garegin, in his opinion, is already not a Catholicos. I mean, that's completely foolish statement, but this shows where he was heading from the beginning, when he started, let's say, shaming priests for some behavior or some personal matters and so on. But the ultimate goal was to capture the Catholicos chair. So I think his goal is to go till the end. And the question here is, to which extent church is ready for such an attack? And I'm not sure, frankly speaking, because church is now, first of all, rather weak, because it is rather small compared to pre-communist times. Church is much, much smaller in all of its resources. And then the clergy is, rather elderly, so they are not capable of this, political campaigning, of this fight and so on. So to be frank, I'm not expecting church to be, engaged in this political clash on one hand. On another hand, Pashinyan has very few tools to attack church, because he would like people to rise up and attack church. And of course, he would like to mobilize people from sects, from Protestant groups, from some irregular religious groups against the church. But I'm not sure they will. And if they will, anyway, church can mobilize easily much more people. So I don't see how. Maybe he can try to use police, but even this, I mean, procedurally, how can he proceed? But then there is one thing. Among the clergy, there are some people who support him. Unfortunately, there are some, and there are some relatives to his government representatives. So maybe he has some hidden network inside, and this is his bet. I think we will see that in the short future, maybe within 1 month.
Hrant, we have a couple of topics. The first one is in Ukraine. After the audacious Operation Spiderweb attack by Ukraine on Russia's strategic air assets and a mostly failed negotiation session in Istanbul last week, the trajectory of the Ukraine war doesn't seem to be going anywhere near peace. Even though there are reports of increased bombings of Ukraine by Russia, many analysts believe that the retaliation for the air bases is yet to come. And Trump, after a conversation with Putin, said that Zelensky has given Putin the right to respond in kind. So in essence, they've basically signaled that it's okay to go ahead with whatever they want to do. What are your thoughts on the recent developments in the Ukraine war? And I think I just want to mention, we keep coming back on this show to the Ukraine war. It's because as long as the war in Ukraine is continuing, we think that Russia, vis-a-vis its policies in the South Caucasus, is going to be on a holding pattern. So we're watching to see what happens over there and how Russia is going to start turning around after that.
You are right, but not only Russia, because Russian-Western rivalry affects Armenia very badly. Obviously, they are not going to become friends, but even decrease of rivalry and of hardship in these relations after ending of the hot war will decrease tensions in South Caucasus as well, and pressure on Armenia from both sides as well. So I think it is very important for Armenia for this war to end. But going back to Russian retaliation attack, yeah, obviously it is yet to come. And frankly speaking, Russians would not ask Trump if they can attack or not. They just told him they will, and he understood that he cannot intervene. It's not something he just, okay, you can do whatever you want. He would like to intervene in any way. It doesn't mean he would intervene, just to help Zelensky or Ukraine. No, but he would like to show his power, but he has no power to stop this. So that's first. Second is that obviously war is entering a period after which it's very hard to stop, and most likely it will go on until most likely, February 2026. And by then, I think Ukraine will utilize all of its resources and will not be able to fight back the same way as
You mean from a manpower perspective?
Not only manpower, because we have seen reports that Russia is now ahead in technology and UAVs as well, because it has been a weak point of Russia since the very beginning. But manpower is also very important. And we have seen Russia's strengthening attacks on Ukraine, also not only in air, but also on the ground. And they have been successful in some directions. Although you don't see any strategic change on the map, but we see some preparations for that, which might occur, in autumn or winter, yet to see. But I think if Americans will decrease the level of support, which is most likely to happen, I think that Ukraine's ability to fight back will be very limited. Not to say that its manpower is shrinking right now, because the positions Russians are entering, we see that there are very few people. So Ukrainians are lacking manpower, so Russians are able right now to attack from two directions simultaneously. This basically has not happened yet, so it's happening now. And that's just because Russia has superiority in manpower, which it did not have from the very beginning. So Russia had superiority in number of equipment, in artillery shells, but it lacked manpower, and it lacked UAVs. And now Russia is ahead in manpower and in UAVs. So it's ahead in every field, although the difference is not as big, but it is growing. It's steadily growing, and it will likely to continue increasing. So ratio is now, let's say, 1.25 to 1 in these fields, manpower and UAVs. And most likely by the beginning of the next year, it will be 2 to 1.
So in general, it seems to me that you think that this war is not going to come to an end until one side is completely exhausted.
Yeah, that's what we can see from now, because the also external actors which are involved here, they don't want this war to stop. We have seen how Germans have been repeating that they need 5 more years to invest in their military, so that they need to buy some time. So they need Ukraine to buy them time. But also we have seen that they were not very successful in rearmament during the last 3 years. So I'm not sure if even 5 years is enough for Germany, but at least that's what Germany wants to achieve. And also that is true for UK and for France.
Let's go to another topic, that international topic that affects Armenia and Armenian foreign policy. While Yerevan was holding this Yerevan Dialogue Forum, talking about expansion of the EU and trying to see how it could be done more efficiently, Poland was gearing up for elections. And the results of that election are now in. Karole Nawrocki won with less than 51% of the vote. So it was a very tight race, but we now have a 42-year-old historian and president of the Polish Institute of National Remembrance. He's conservative, not particularly anti-Russian, and not particularly pro-Ukrainian, and more Trump than the rest of the EU. And yeah, he has various agendas like anti-immigration and patriotism in mind. So we wanted to ask, how do you see Nawrocki's election portend for Poland's relations with Russia, EU, Ukraine, and so forth?
Well, actually, he is anti-Russian because he is on Russian extremist list because of he was destroying some Soviet monuments in Poland. So he was anti-Russian for a very long time, as most of Polish right-wing politicians.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as of now, he's shifting towards, being neutral towards Russia because he sees that threat is not coming from Russia right now for Poland. And the real threat for Poland right now is that Poland might be engaged in war with Russia the very same way as Ukraine is. So he, as Polish nationalist, understands that this is a big threat for Poland, and he sees how many countries would like his country to be involved in that. So basically, those who have voted for him, they voted for not being involved in this war. So anti-Russian sentiment is on drop in Poland, and anti-Ukrainian sentiment, unfortunately, is on the rise. And there are, let's say, at least two reasons. One is because there are too many Ukrainian immigrants to Poland, and this always creates some tension. And although there is a rather big cultural proximity between Ukrainians and Polish people, but still there are too many. And the second reason is that Ukraine has been behaving, Ukrainian leadership, of course, not in a polite way towards Poland. They did not appreciate anything they did. So basically, his electorate and he himself shares the same sentiment as Trump. So when he said to Zelensky, you have no cards and you should be thankful. And this idea, in reality, very many people, including Zelensky supporters, also have in mind. So I think Zelensky's behavior, he thinks he's in movie, he thinks he's, he does not understand the real situation, and he creates a situation where more and more countries are, acting against him. So Poland is going to, cool down on Russia. That's what I expect.
And how could the election of Nawrocki impact our region in South Caucasus? I can't not notice this headline in Le Monde, which said, I'm reading it verbatim, Poland, once the spearhead of NATO and EU enlargement, could become the country that closes the door to new members. Do you think that there is a point in this, and essentially the goal of EU enlargement now is further out of reach than before?
Look, that door has been closed for, basically at least 1 decade, and it's not going to be open. So I think Le Monde is not correct here, because France is also one of the countries who is closing this door. But speaking of the political change which occurred in Poland, we can see at least two major trends. One is Trump gaining more land in EU, and he failed in Romania. But he continued fighting, and Poland is even more important. Of course, if Romania had also this kind of political change, right-wing politician as a leader, that would change the situation completely in reality. Because now, let's say, as of yesterday, politically yesterday, there have been two countries opposing Brussels, which were Hungary and Slovakia. And now we basically see Poland, and theoretically, Trump could base himself on Italy as well, because Italy has also right-wing leadership, although they are aligning with Brussels, but that's I think tactical. And if they see that situation is changing, their approach would also change. And if we go further, let's say that in reality, anti-Russian unity in European Union is very fictive, because most of the majority of the countries of the EU don't have any interest in combating Russia. At least Greece does not have such interest. Spain and Portugal have no such interest, and so on. The countries which are involved in this battle, let's say, those are Scandinavian countries, Baltic countries, and I think that's it. So in reality, this anti-Russian unity in EU is very weak, and one or two more countries and it will collapse. Unfortunately, Brussels did not find anything else to unite Europe, and they are insisting on an anti-Russian approach. And I think this is very, very weak game, because they are trying to rearm Europe, and in condition when Europe is aging, I don't see this happening in reality, because you need more and more money on social support. Of course, they say, how can you spend money on social services while there is Russia on the next door? But when the society is aging, you cannot deal with it any other way. So I think EU will not be successful in this, more aggressive foreign policy agenda. I think this is short term, and I don't think this is going to lead it somewhere. Even in countries where they have, this leadership which is very insisting, like France, for example, we see that majority of population is opposing. So you cannot push for this policy when you don't have popular support, neither for the leader nor for the policy itself.
Coming back from the EU to Armenia, we've talked about strained Russian-Armenian relations before, and we talked about the increased attention that Russia has been putting on the region. Lavrov's visit a couple of weeks ago was part of it, and last week, Russia's top senator, Valentina Matviyenko, visited Yerevan. In short, very quickly, can you tell us if this visit was able to move the needle in Armenian-Russian relations, or what it achieved at all?
From what I see, the real goal for Russians right now is opening a consulate in Kapan, in southern Armenia, so then they can, at least preserve their presence there, because lastly, Pashinyan has asked them to leave de facto Armenian-Azerbaijani border in Sunik, and then he asked them to leave from Armenian-Iranian checkpoint. And the next is obviously asking them to leave the Armenian-Iranian border overall. So I think right now they are understanding that they are losing southern Armenia and connection to Iran, so they are trying to preserve it at least diplomatically. And Pashinyan instead he opened an honor consulate of France, and the real consulate and general consulate, let's say, and the honor consulate is by diplomatic means in no comparison. Honor consulate is very low level of consulate, while a general consulate is much higher level of relations. But from we can see now, Pashinyan is against Russians opening the consulate, so he did not agree on that. That is why it's not being opened last 3 years, and most likely Russians wanted to get a final permit, because in their bureaucratic procedures everything is ready already. So it's now time for Armenian agreement, and Pashinyan has not agreed. So as of now, I think tensions in Armenian-Russian relations will increase.
Okay, well, let's turn to Armenia's economy a little bit. It seems to me that there are some serious problems in our economy. Even though the government reported a 5.2% growth in the first quarter of 2025, if you look under the covers, Hrant, you discover that things are not necessarily so great. Foreign trade, and this includes the much discussed re-exports section, slowed down significantly, something like they slowed down 22%. Although there's some growth still, around 5 or 6%, the slowdown is pretty sharp. And if it continues for another 6 months, it's not going to be pretty for the entire country. Industrial output also shrunk 18.5% over the previous year, 2024. What's going on right now? Can you talk to us a little bit about what you're seeing in your numbers?
Of course. In reality, the slowdown in economic growth is to bigger portion related to decrease of re-exports than to decrease of, actual exports and actual production. For example, last year we had, let's say, some 20-25% unsupported industrial growth, which turned out to be they have written that the re-exported goods have been produced locally. Mainly, it was about precious metals, and as of now, Armenia does not re-export it, mostly because Russia has changed direction of re-exports, and maybe they are directly exporting it to Dubai. So as of now, Armenia is is not re-exporting as much as previously, but still there is some share of re-exports. So the foreign trade has decreased just due to this reason. In the rest fields, we see that there is still some trend towards growth, which is observed at construction and some services. But we see some troubles in services as well, because we see that there are problems with tourism, with IT. So those are the services Armenia exports. So there is some pressure on Armenian dram, but we have seen it is stable right now. And one of the reasons is that that US dollar is depreciating as well. I mean, against other currencies. So technically, Armenian dram is very stable right now. But I'm not sure to how long it might remain stable, because the influx of foreign currency towards Armenia has decreased as well lately. So I think, yes, at some point, when Armenia will lose more and more of its re-exports right now, we will slow down economically. But again, I would not necessarily call this situation which we have right now as difficulty. We might face it in the future, but not yet.
So given that some of these so-called external factors, specifically, we're referring to the capitalizing on the war in Ukraine that has fueled a lot of the growth in the Armenian economy over the past 2-3 years. If these factors start slowing down, how is this government planning to keep growing the economy?
Well, Pashinyan's plan is to open for Turkey and Azerbaijan and to use this as the next growing factor, which I don't believe to happen, first of all, due to Turkey and Azerbaijan willing to open Armenia for themselves, but not to open themselves for Armenia. So they want this process to be one-sided. That's first. And second, I don't believe Armenia can gain from these relations, given the relation of these countries towards Armenia. So they will try to do everything possible that Armenia is not gaining and is losing. So I'm not believing in mutually beneficial relations right now. So I think his calculation here is not based on real situation. But again, now I'm looking at exports, and most of goods which are produced locally, their export is increasing. The goods which have been re-exported, this export is decreasing. So basically, we have some growth in reality, and this growth is masked by decreasing re-exports. But anyway, I think at least there is some potential for future growth for, let's say, 3 to 4 years. But Armenia will be highly dependent on international situation, and there are some discussions that the next economic crisis due to structural factors and Trump's actions might occur this year or maybe next year. I don't know to which extent this is connected to something real, but at least if this happens, it will definitely affect Armenia. And the next thing is that if sanctions against Russia are lifted, this will also affect Armenia, of course, and rather significantly. I cannot say to which extent, I mean, in percentage, but it will be felt. It will be felt for everyone and for rather long time, for several years. So the effect will be lasting. So now regarding the probability of sanctions lifting against Russia, let's say I see this probability at least partially, because Russians are right now discussing with Americans the sanctions which are not connected to this war, and are connected to the previous events and to some events which are not connected to Ukraine at all. So at least some sanctions might be lifted, and then this will mean that there is a door opening for Russia-American relations, and then some other countries might lift sanctions. Also, we have seen that there is a political change in South Korea, and their leadership also is willing to improve relations with Russia. Korean brands will go back to Russia, so they will lift sanctions as well. So I think overall trends of sanctions lifting against Russia will be increasing. But on other hand, we see that many of these sanctions have been institutionalized. So lifting them will be a very big difficulty, especially when there are some opposite discussions as well. For example, in American Congress, we've seen the debate on 500% tax on countries which are trading with Russia, and those include China, India, EU, and so on. So how they are going to tax the whole world, I don't know, but that's what they discuss. They are not really trying to use this bill, but instead they are trying to counter this against any major try by Trump administration to improve relations with Russia. So it's kind of new institutional constraint created for disrupting his policy on Russian track.
Yeah, Hrant, speaking of exports, there has been this slow boiling news that's coming out of Armenia's northern neighbor, Georgia. For more than a month now, Armenian trucks full of brandy, which is a major production of Armenia, have been stopped at the border. Similarly, import of flowers has been stopped. I believe the Armenian football team's plane flight was not allowed by the Georgian side. Do you know what's going on with Georgia? I mean, it seems more than a technical issue. Like Hrant Mikaelian was very tight-lipped about it. He said, we're resolving some problems, but not all of them are going to be resolved by the end of the month. And meanwhile, there's talk about some brandy manufacturers in Armenia going bankrupt now because of this. What is going on with Georgia? I thought we had a strategic partnership with them.
Frankly speaking, I cannot definitely say what is happening there. Regarding flowers, there might be some competition, and Georgians might try to utilize their transporting leverage so that they gain in this competition. Regarding brandy, in reality, they don't have strong competition here. So it looks like there is some politics involved.
Yeah, and it's not even and I just want to say that Georgia is a transit country for Armenian brandy. It's not even a consumer, but they're insisting that they must check all the cargo and check all the paperwork. I just wanted to provide that distinction.
Yeah, right. That's what I was saying. So basically, there might be either hardship between Armenian and Georgian governments themselves, or Georgian government might be affected by some third parties, and pro-government and pro-Western, speakers in Armenia, they say that it's somehow connected to Russia because this Georgian government, according to them, is pro-Russian, and that is why Georgia acts against Armenia. To be frank, it's a bit conspirological mindset. It could be true, but I'm not sure because Georgia, as of now, still does not have diplomatic relations with Russia. So I'm not sure that Georgia would spoil relations with Armenia just because of Russia, when its own relations with Russia are not that great. They are improving, obviously, but they are not great, definitely. So what I see is that behind all these discussions that Armenia is now, first of all, improving its foreign policy, here is France, US, strategic partnership with US, and then Georgia and so on. This is all not serious. Now, not opening the Russian General Consulate in Kapan, I think this is a real diplomatic failure. At the same time, what we have gained is very weak gains, because let's look at, for example, Armenian-US strategic partnership, which we had signed in the beginning of the year. Now the government in America has changed, and this government is viewing current Armenian government in completely opposite way, because this government in Armenia, let's be frank, is a pro-democratic party, let's say. So much like Ukrainian government and so on. So they view this government differently. So at least during Trump's time, and maybe possibly if there is J.D. Vance or someone else from Republican Party, this partnership will not work as intended. Maybe in the future something will change. Now with France, we should not overestimate the depth of dialogue. And with Georgia, we have signed a strategic partnership, but at the same time, Georgia has signed much more sophisticated and deep documents with Turkey and Azerbaijan, which are not only strategic partnership, but also a military alliance with them. I don't know, could they affect it? Or maybe there is something else. I don't want to speculate, because from what I've heard by different speakers and different, policymakers, could not convince me of any version. I just can say that either there is some hardship between countries or there is some foreign influence.
Hrant, does this government have a tax policy to support economic growth?
The overall tax policy which this government has is collect more and more taxes. Pashinyan is speaking about that every other day. So he has, as of now, he has three beloved topics. One is give me taxes, and giving taxes means you love your state, and loving your state means loving your country, which, by the way, is not the same, obviously, but that's what he says. No, he said loving your government is like loving your state, and loving your state is like loving your country. So in very manipulative way, just like he loves. But at the same time, so he tries to collect more and more taxes. And since the beginning of this year, we had, first of all, improved administration of taxes, so less and less tax evasion possible, and at the same time, increased taxes for some categories of population, including those who are running micro businesses and so on. So they are protesting right now as well. So we have these micro businesses protests, and because they are saying we are not able to continue if this tax preserve is if this higher taxes preserve, and also some property taxes have increased and some other taxes. So this is his tax policy. But for preserving economic growth, you don't need just taxes. You need right spending, right investment, and here is the problem. Because last 7 years, just since the beginning of Pashinyan's rule, we have seen that investments in budget have been not implemented to biggest share, because basically every year the budget on state investments have been met by, let's say, 40% or something. And most of the spendings which have been intended from the beginning of the year, 2018 was the budget project from the previous government, but since then it continues, it goes on and on. So 60% of investment which should have been done by the government, and which includes mainly capital investments in roads, construction, and some other things, they are not met. So I don't see how this government is changing its policy, especially now. I have been criticizing the previous economy minister, Vahan Kerobian, but now I see he was not that bad, because this one has no connection to economy as well. That one was he himself was businessman. He was not a good economic theorist, but at least he was good in practice. But this one does not understand anything about economy. He's just political person, just loyal to Pashinyan, and his policies, his statements are very poor. So I don't believe Pashinyan is able to support economic growth, although Armenia has some means for that. And technically they could, but I don't see how they do that.
Hrant, you addressed one of the areas of concern for me, and that is the fact that the projected budget expenditures are falling short of expectations by about 29 to 30%. Hundreds of millions of dollars have not been spent according to the projects that they had for project in 2025. And significantly, those I think 2/3 of that is on defense budgets. But for the sake of time, let's move on forward to a question. What's going on with the budget deficit, the national debt? Because I believe that since the beginning of this year, when I think about 3 months ago, we were talking about this, we had a debt to GDP ratio of about 53%, and the debt stood at $12.5 billion. But they have been borrowing since then, haven't they?
Yeah.
And also, while you're talking about that, let's talk about the structure of the debt as well, because for whatever reason, I believe in February, Georg Papoyan, Armenia's Minister of Economy, felt it important to highlight that, a lot of that debt is not external debt, it's internal debt, and it's owed to the citizens, so-called, of Armenia. I think he misrepresented numbers as well, but what is the structure of the debt as well?
Okay, right now, Armenia's state debt is $13.6 billion, out of which almost 7.1 is external debt, and 6.5 is it's internal debt. Internal debt is overpriced because of overpriced dram. So basically, it might drop a bit, let's say by 20%, most likely, when dram will depreciate, and dram will depreciate when the sanctions, evasion, and all this, re-exports will be over, which I don't know when will it happen, because in 2022 I expected this not to last long, but we see that this war is not ending. So at least until the war is ending, this will continue somehow. But anyway, as of now, we have more than 50% of debt, of state debt, which is external debt, and less than 50%, which is internal debt. And yes, the general trend for the last several years, maybe 10 or more, was increasing of internal debt and decreasing of external debt, or at least decreasing the share of external debt. Another thing is that in February, the government has borrowed some $750 million from the market. And these Eurobonds, by the way, percentage was rather high, significantly higher than the previous debt, which is for me questionable. Why it happened? Because they declared that the demand on these obligations was very high, more than $2 billion, if I'm not mistaken. They said 2.3 or 2.7 billion dollars. So demand was very high, which means they could decrease the percentage, but they didn't. And percentage is, if I'm not mistaken, some 6.4 or something percent, which is high. I think this is high for Armenia in dollar. I think this is high, and I think this was not very good move. But on the other hand, there is another question: did Armenia need this borrowing right now? And moreover, for what reason was it done? Because firstly, when they were borrowing the money, they have not declared about it, and it was let's say opposition activist Artur Danielian who speak about it, and he said that this $750 million loan is somehow connected to external politics, connected to Turkey and Azerbaijan. And then in several days, government admitted that they are borrowing money. So he somehow got this information through inside talks. And at least it's not unclear. In reality, they have not denied this. Of course, it does not mean that it necessarily is true, but at least I think we need to be careful here, and we need to track this story, because for me it is unclear everything which is connected to this new debt. And overall, yes, Armenia's external debt is under control right now, and overall debt as well. But this is also due to the, let's say, inflated GDP, inflated due to inflated dram, let's say, and it might change one day. And whenever transit of Russian goods will stop through Armenia, Armenian GDP, especially in dollars, not so much in dram, but much more in dollars, will decrease by significant portion, and then the share of debt toward the GDP will grow. Another problem is when we speak of new debts, we need to understand one more thing, that borrowing money is part of normal economic process, but we have economic crisis rather regularly. Let's say 1 in 7 years or something, there is a crisis, just like it was written in the Bible. So when we have good years, we need to give back the borrowed money, and when we are in crisis, we might borrow new money.
Yeah, we have to pay off the debt every now and then.
Yeah, but when we are borrowing money during the high economic growth period, and that's what the government is saying, and that's what's more or less observed reality, that there is an economic growth in Armenia, but we are still borrowing money. This is inadequate.
And on top of that, we're borrowing money to spend rather than invest in strategic assets. As Aspet said, we can't even invest based on the allocated budget, which is
that is very, very correct observation, because borrowing money to pay pensions, it's not right direction to go, because if you are not able to pay your pensions, borrowing money for that, in the long term, will bring you to the bankruptcy.
Yeah, Hrant, let's go to politics a little bit very quickly. Last time you were here with us, I believe it was mid-May, we asked you about the effort to launch impeachment proceedings against Pashinyan. This was publicized by a group called Artunem, We Are Awake. Well, and for a long time there was, I believe, like a hot potato in terms of who from the opposition parties should be the responsible party for launching these impeachment proceedings. And the Republican Party at the time said that they don't have a candidate. And Haya Sandarsing, led by Robert Kocharian, said that they want to go to elections in 2006, so they don't consider impeachment a viable option. Now, on June 7th, the Republican Party of Armenia has finally found a candidate they could nominate for prime minister as part of the impeachment process. And his name is David Hambardzumyan. He is the mayor of Masis. Previously, there were rumors that Armen Ashotyan was going to be the candidate, but obviously that was not the case. I want to ask, while David Hambardzumyan seems to be a strong member of the RPA with appropriate credentials, he is virtually unknown to the public. So in your opinion, do you think that the specific choice of candidate can work? And would the opposition be able to garner the necessary votes in parliament, including about 20 defector votes from civil contract, in order to impeach Pashinyan?
On one hand, I understand the Republican Party, why they chose him, because he is elected mayor, and despite all hardship which the opposition in Armenia has right now, at least they have one mayor. And this mayor they want to present as, someone who has gained, at least on his level, the popular support, and not only the popular support, but overall has legitimacy. He is elected. While, for example, Armen Ashotyan is not elected, so he has much more approval rate in the country itself, let's say, except to Masis town. But on the other hand, I think here the Republicans lack a bit the political thinking, because they are focused much more on the internal loyalty and on internal processes rather on the overall political context. And this is natural to this party, because this has been for a long time. And by the way, this proved to be efficient, or at least from one side, which has been after the total attack on Republican Party in 2018 and afterwards. It proved to be rather strong inside, but at the same time, it is unpopular, because it does not bring to the top the persons which have popular support even within the party itself. So I think this is a problematic figure to bet on him. I mean, David Hambardzumyan on one hand. Now coming back to this, internal opposition debate, whether you need an impeachment or election. Frankly speaking, I don't believe in neither impeachment or election, because in in semi-authoritarian systems with dominating party, which Armenia has had since let's say 1995 up until now. It's not viable option to have a change through the election. There is one case of that which happened in Georgia in 2012, but it was very specific case, and I don't see how it is replicated in Armenia, frankly speaking. That's first and very important. Second, regarding the impeachment, opposition does not have enough votes in the parliament. So you can speak much about that, but ultimately, if the process is failed, then the public will continue losing trust in opposition, because opposition has started too many political processes which it has lost, because they have calculated very poorly, very short term. They don't calculate for long term. They calculate for a maximum half a year, but in this kind of political process, you need to think at least 2 to 3 years, and preferably even more. And that's what political opposition in Armenia is lacking. As of now, I don't see how either of these processes is bringing political change to Armenia.
Okay, well, let's go to our last section, which was actually in response to a listener who wrote to us last week and said, I'm going to read her question or his question. Can you please invite a demographer to explain the concept of birth rate decline, collapse, and what implications it may have for Armenia and the wider region? Well, Hrant, you're a sociologist and data analyst. Can you take a couple of minutes and discuss that very issue, demographic decline and collapse, and how it affects Armenia from the perspectives of, for example, its ability to prosper economically, operating a healthy labor force, providing social benefits, social security for retirees, older folks, etc. And also, of course, very importantly, defending itself, maintaining defense forces, etc.
Well, right now, we are not collapsing yet. There are some societies which are already approaching the demographic collapse, which are, we can say, South Korea and some other countries, Puerto Rico, by the way. So they are approaching the demographic collapse. And from some stages, you are not able to sustain the social systems of your countries, which, of course, you have mentioned as well. Armenia is not there yet. Armenia has felt a decline in birth rates, and rather significant. During late Soviet times, there were some 80,000 children born in Armenia annually, and in 2024 we had just 33,000, and this is significant difference. But it's not the same as the mentioned countries. For example, the fertility rate in South Korea is 0.7, which means that every next generation will be 3 times smaller than the current generation, and it is expected that by the end of 21st century, South Korea will face significant demographic collapse and decreasing number of population, especially in young ages. So in young ages, they will have like 10 times less than now, and maybe even more. Bigger difference. So in Armenia, we have fertility rate of 1.7 right now, and it has been rather stable throughout last decade, let's say. But now we are in the phase of slow decrease. The only social strata where we have the demographic collapse right now are the refugees from Artsakh, because they have lost their homelands, they have lost their houses, and many of them have lost their spouses, I mean the women. So we have seen the real demographic collapse among Artsakhi refugees, because there is some stats of the children which have been born specifically to that category. And if Artsakh had previously, like 10 years ago or so, had 2,000 births annually, now it has most likely 4 times less. I mean, the Artsakh. So there is a demographic collapse there, but not to the whole Armenia. But at the same time, we're approaching a time when there will be more people dying in Armenia annually than births. So that's because of overall aging, and because of some other changes. Initially, one of the reasons why the fertility has declined in Armenia were, let's say, there were several reasons. One was economic collapse of a post-Soviet period and of transition. Another was growth of infertility due to health conditions and due to some other trends, and also growth of abortions in 90s. But since then, we have seen that in reality, the real birth rate in Armenia has not collapsed. What has collapsed was the migration situation, because very many people have migrated out of Armenia. Especially, there was initially very big disparity between men and women. Men have emigrated, so Armenia has structure of society which is mostly like society which has passed through a major war. And of course, we had a war, but not to this scale. I mean, the kind of Second World War or something like that, or Civil War or something like that. So in reality, this disparity is caused by the migration, and obviously many women would not be able to find a spouse, which is a very big problem. At least it was a big problem like 5 to 10 years ago, and especially 15, 20, 25. Now it is a bit improving. So that's one thing. Another thing is that youth is emigrating. And of course, they're having kids outside of Armenia, which is another problem. So this is another cause of fertility decrease. But when we look at families, we see that in reality, families which have kids, they have more or less the same number of kids as in late Soviet period. So cultural change has not been that deep. But there is a big if, or big what? Yes. So what is it? In reality, for cultural reasons and for preserving fertility rates, the religious factor is very important. And combat against Armenian Church will obviously lead to the decrease in fertility and to the collapse of the social models which we have now. Because even though not every Armenian is, fanatically Christian, many are culturally Christians, let's say, but even though they are looking at Armenian Apostolic Church and to Christian, beliefs, which tells people to have kids. And basically, if you tell that this is all, unimportant, or you need to look at something else like wine festivals and so on, which, by the way, I learned to be, I thought these wine festivals are funded by the government, but it turned out that it is funded by the government, but the US government, not Armenian government. These years they have decreased the spending, but still it was funded by the Americans and foreigners, let's say, which is very worrying, because they are intervening in social sphere of Armenia. That's not only the case, of course, because they are intervening in many fields, but here we see that there is worrying sign of fertility decline as well, because of the religious transition as well. Another thing is that for stable demographic landscape, you need stable labor market, at least for developing countries. And in Armenia, we don't have it. We have high unemployment, and unfortunately, last year unemployment has grown, despite what Pashinyan says, because the labor market survey made by Armstad shows that the unemployment rate has grown by 1.5%, which for a country like Armenia is very significant.
Well,
So
I read that it was at 14% recently, like in last month, Armenia had 14% unemployment rate, which is pretty high, I think.
Annually, the increase was 1.5%, if I'm not mistaken. So 14% is not little. I think it's rather high, because Russia right now has it 2 to 3%, EU has 3 to 4%, America is also somewhere around 3%. So developing countries, or developed countries, or at least the countries which don't have troubles on their labor market, they have low unemployment rate, which means only the people which are leaving one job for another, or they are seeking for a job, or they are having a retreat or something like that, they are unemployed. The rest are employed. In Armenia, there are many professionals who are unemployed. So that's another thing, and especially in the provinces. Provinces are to very big share unemployed, especially rural areas. Rural areas have collapsing employment situation, because since 2018, since late 2018, Pashinyan has closed down the Ministry of Agriculture, and many policies were shut down. So we have seen how the social situation, economic situations in villages is collapsing, and the growth of agricultural productions has been negative since then, and obviously this is leading to emigration from villages as well. So, and 2 years ago, the government tried to assess these issues, collapsing the birth rate of villagers in a technical or administrative way. They said if you are having a birth to a child in a village, then or registered in a village, then you can gain some more or additional social benefits. And many of those who have moved to Yerevan already for some period of time, they register themselves to having kids in villages. So we have peaking birth rates in rural areas, but this is all fake. So as of now, we need at least we need several things. We need to improve unemployment. We need to look carefully at housing situation, because housing is very interconnected to the demographics. We need to, support church instead of attacking it. And we need to look carefully at migration. And of course, villages and rural areas need much more attention. This overall, I think this package will significantly improve the demographic situation in Armenia, and then of course the healthcare for decreasing the death rates.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time and your insight, Hrant. I think we're going to leave it there for today. We will talk to you again very soon.
Thank you, Aspet. Thank you, Hovik.
Thank you, Hrant. All right. Now it's time for the kitchen sink, where the stories are too hot, too weird, or just too corrupt to leave out. Aspet, shall we wade in?
All right, Hovik, let's just jump in. You first.
Okay,
what's your favorite topic? Come on.
Well, let's talk about Tigran Avinyan, who reported his income declaration last week.
We love income declarations.
Yeah, once the poster boy of civil contracts anti-corruption crusade, now he flaunts a millionaire's declaration, stuffed, importantly, with crypto gains, unexplained gifts from family members, and also generous donations from other people. We should remember that as head of ANIF, the Armenian National Investment Fund, he steered it into the ground. And it just turns out that Armenia's new revolutionaries get rich the same old-fashioned way, mysteriously. And also, I guess the only change is they now have ever-growing amounts of crypto in their wallets. So he's actually reporting 500,000 in crypto assets.
$500,000.
Yeah. And regarding ANIF, I think we're not going to let this topic go. We'll cover it in a way it's due. But I should mention that ANIF wasted millions of dollars of
Tens
Armenia's
of millions
money.
of dollars.
Many executives were hired at very exorbitant salaries, even by US standards. Just one episode I want to remind people about of how nefarious this is. ANIF, Armenian National Investment Fund, gave after 8 days after a offshore company was founded. 8 days after its founding, they donated or they invested $4 million US in that company. Later, it was to be found out that that company was owned by Tigran Avinyan's wife's friend. It was some kind of a cosmetics company that no one has ever heard of, and I'm sure no one will ever will. I guess this is one of the ways that crypto is making back into Pashinyan's wallets.
Maybe Tigran Avinyan should be sent to Paris. Have you heard that they are having a wave of abductions, kidnappings of the crypto rich, and they've been apparently held in various estates and being tortured for their passwords of their crypto wallets? Have you heard this? Yeah. Anyway, just when you are talking about ANIF and, it was dissolved in 2024, we thought, okay, we're finally rid of it. Tens of millions wasted, unaccounted for and everything. But no, there's an ANIF 2.0 now, and it's called Enterprise Armenia. And this thing was established recently, I think, to basically do the same thing that ANIF failed to do. This is, like I said, ANIF 2.0. And just when you thought that there will be new faces and everything, no, it is Gohar Abadjan who is at the head of this thing. And if you don't know who she is Mrs. Ararat Mirzoyan.
Arat Mirzoyan is Armenia's foreign minister and a top civil contract official.
That's
Yes.
right. So yeah, it looks like the revolution is still completely in the family. It all goes around in circles and nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. So I want to talk about a scandal that is not very much reported in international media. In Ptghni, which is a village on right off the Sevan highway, very close to Yerevan, 1 hectare of land was auctioned off for just 150,000 Armenian dram. That's like $400 to a certain Meher Baghdasarov. This was back in 2021 after the revolution. He later subdivided it and just sold just a larger portion, which is 0.8 hectares, for over $500,000. That's like a return of 2,000 times the original price. Baghdasarov, as it turns out, is linked to the brother of civil contract parliamentary leader Haik Gonjorian. And in another separate deal, he exchanged another plot of land from Ptghni. I don't know the origins of this plot of land, but he exchanged it for an apartment that is valued at $1.5 million. I think after Hetk broke these stories, criminal arrests followed, but you would not expect both Armenian government media and international media to cover this because it's not as scandalous as covering Pashinyan's political enemies. So there we go.
Well, Hovig, you and I have been technologists in our careers, so we can talk a little bit about. So we go to a favorite topic. Once upon a time in the magical land of Armenia, where the government suddenly decided that they wanted to own a beautiful, shiny supercomputer. You know, a whirring beast of modernity purchased for the modest price of $7.3 million. So with great fanfare, this supercomputer was purchased in 2024. It was shipped to Armenia. The people cheered, ministers smiled. Progress had arrived, boxed, padded, and probably sitting in a government warehouse under a do not open sign. But then came a plot twist. The ministers of science, culture, education, and sports, wearing all four hats, sheepishly admitted, well, we're not exactly ready to install it yet. And things have not gone very smoothly. Apparently, the competition to build the data center didn't go well. And maybe by the end of the year was the time frame that we got for when this could happen. Now, you might think this is just good old-fashioned mismanagement, but wait, there's more.
There's more.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us?
How did I know? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. Because
yeah, but I know the rest of the story. So kudos to Arm Comedy for cluing us in on this. But basically, the supercomputer was purchased through a company called XArt, run by one individual named Hrant Mikaelian. And guess who won the contract to install it for an extra $2.3 million?
His dad? His brother?
Yes, Hrant's son, David Hambardzumyan.
Okay, I was
but
close.
The connection goes even further. David Hambardzumyan and Tigran Avinyan's father were very close. They did business deals together. And David Hambardzumyan, also the guy that constructing the data center, supplied trees, of all things, data centers and trees, nice combination, to the Yerevan government under a scandalous contract. It was reported widely that there was malfeasance in this contract, and we won't go there, but just the punchline is always that the government investigated it and found nothing done wrong. So that's the situation where another case of nepotism and potential corruption and at least mismanagement.
Yeah, Hovig, I'm seriously, I mean, beyond all of the corruption, mismanagement, and everything, I'm seriously concerned about the success of this project. I have actually created and installed supercomputers at my university, and it takes a lot. And I have no idea if the kind of knowledge and know-how exists, or these people even know how to ask the right questions to get something like this installed from the ground up.
Well, I'm
It's not
expecting
child's
more.
play.
It isn't, and I mean, obviously, there's a lot of concerns like HVAC, like power and so forth. I'm pretty sure, like seeing how government contracts have been implemented, I think this is a big risk. I don't want to be cynical, but I think that Armenian government is going to be facing bigger problems than that, or more simpler problems, like finding the damn power cord for the thing and realizing come December that they forgot to order it, you know. Sorry, but you know, I'm willing to take some odds from you in terms of betting whether this will be done by December as a claim.
Yeah, yeah. Of
Yeah.
course, this is at a time where, geopolitically speaking, they're talking about how they want to shut down the nuclear power plant or something like that. You know, talk about power requirements. Okay, well, what else do you have? You want to talk about your grandma, my grandma, any grandmas?
No, no, but I do want to talk about some Armenian grandmas. Last week, a video interview was surfaced by uh, Kima Hayrapetyan. She was one of the two grandmas, like 70-year-old grandmas, arrested during the Gyumri elections. She was treated horribly. She was imprisoned for at least several days. She was made to strip down and searched. And all of this, I believe, was done to extract confessions from her that she was bribed for the elections, which she never confessed to, and she, you know, maintained her innocence, and she was eventually released. But I mean, stooping down to such a low level as to disrespect elderly people for political gains is just another way that this government operates. And you know, I believe there will be more on this story, but so far all I'm seeing is that, you know, she's now at least on the way, if not completely off the hook for whatever she was being suspected of, and there's no explanation for her for the way she was treated.
Yeah. Well, Vic, you know, a little earlier, you and I recorded a show with Rananjay Anand, and we were talking about how amazing it is that the Indian people line up with their government's policies, how they have stopped investing or making destination trips to Turkey and Azerbaijan because those countries support their enemy, Pakistan. Well, I think we should do a hall of shame kind of a thing, dishonorable mention for some of Armenia's friends who are doing business with Turkey and Azerbaijan.
Yeah. Who are some of the closest Armenian friends, Asped?
Well, I would say most people would suddenly name France as one of those
Yes, yes, France.
allies. What are they up to?
Well, France, Total Energies will build a huge gas processing plant at the Absheron field. It looks like business as usual, even for France. And the NATO Support and Procurement Agency, NSPA, has signed an agreement with Airbus, yeah, Aselsan, Lockheed Martin, and a couple of other organizations. So more business for Turkey among the within the NATO framework, but it'd be interesting because some of that technology is something that Armenia relies on. So for the air defense systems. So is Armenia going to purchase now technology that includes Turkish technology in it, and how is that going to work? And also we should, I mean, BP has always been the enemy of Armenia, and the UK has always been inimical to Armenia. But we should mention that also BP has signed an agreement to build a 240 megawatt project in Artsakh, in occupied Artsakh.
That's right.
It's a solar project, but you know, there's no shame. Like I mean, the conquest of Artsakh has been fully digested for these organizations.
Yeah,
Probably they,
I
yeah.
just want to highlight when I was mentioning the Indians, it's because I want to highlight that at least the country and the people are aligned and they want to put their money where their policies are. And here we are in the West. The hypocrisy continues where they claim they are friends of Armenia, and yet their money is not saying that. Their
Well, when you
investments
have
and yeah, their investment strategies do not say the same thing that their mouths are saying.
well, when you have the Prime Minister of Armenia saying that they have no problem I think we don't have to blame the foreigners so much. I think it all comes down to Armenia's what stance Armenia will have on these projects. And if Armenia is accepting, then France or anyone else, will be happy to invest and get more money.
That's right. We have a lot of other things that we could mention. One thing that sort of flew under the radars was Ahmad Shahidov, who threatened Armenia with invasion at some OSCE event. He actually said, during the next war, Armenia may completely lose its sovereignty and the Azerbaijani army may drink Turkish tea in Yerevan, pray and perform namaz in Yerevan's Blue Mosque. So that was verbatim. There's absolutely no angle to this.
Yeah, that was several days before Pashinyan congratulated Aliyev on Biden.
Yeah,
on their holiday, whatever it's called.
That's right. So, and when you were talking a little bit earlier that Pashinyan just throws shit at the wall and sees what sticks as far as maybe church stories and things like that. Well, while everybody was discussing all those church accusations and other things like that, we did not talk about the fact that the Artsakh parliament met and they could not re-elect a president. So right now, Artsakh does not have a president. Meanwhile, Shahramanyan has been summoned and is being investigated or intensively interrogated by the NSS.
Yeah, and in fact, during that week when the Artsakh parliament was supposed to meet, he was summoned 5 times to the investigative body. So there was a strong, and not just him, but other members, and as it was a strong pressure by the Armenian government to prevent the activities of the Artsakh parliament. Now, I think that there's also a little bit of blame to go to the Artsakh parliament because unfortunately, this is, your cause. And if you succumb to threats, whatever they are, whether it's, risking jail time or even worse, then, what have we all fought for all this time? So I'm hoping this issue gets resolved, but I don't see any good news on this front.
Well, Hovik, I'm going to close it on one tiny speck of good news. It's insignificant in the context of all of these things, but a Venezuelan-Armenian gentleman, Domingo Hindoyan, was named the musical director of the LA Opera. For one reason or another, that was a joyous thing for me. I don't know him, but I've known about him for 5 to 10 years. And after doing a lot of great things in Europe, he is now going to be in Los Angeles permanently for the coming years as the music director of the famous LA Opera.
Yeah, when will it be his debut? Do you know?
I don't. I believe that he starts in the summer of 2026, so a year from now. So don't expect to go and see him in this coming season in a couple of months, but next year.
Well, that is something to look forward to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just everyone on this kitchen sink section feel free to go to our show notes because we include detailed links to all the news stories that we cover. We try to make it more entertaining for you, but there are truthful stories behind all of these and by investigative reporters. So feel free to check out the show notes for more details.
That's right. Okay. That was our weekend review for June 8, and we are recording this on June 9, 2025. We were talking earlier with Hrant Mikaelian. He is a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He's also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute and is a co-founder of the Armenian Project.
So, folks, one last request. While Nikol Pashinyan and Anna Hakopian discuss whether they should fight the church tomorrow or start a different rumor during their pillow talk, we work hard to bring you interesting and truthful content. So please make sure to follow us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Those are critical platforms for us that we want to grow on. And share this episode if you're tired of public life being treated like a soap opera. Support us at podcasts.groong.org/donate. I'm Hovik Manucharyan.
And I'm Asbet Bedrosian, still in Los Angeles. Thanks for watching. We're not here to fan the flames. We're here to clear the smoke. Talk to you soon.